The first mistake Melissa made that Christmas was thinking a signature was just ink. Snow was falling hard outside her parents' house in Stowe, Vermont, the kind of clean white snow that makes every window look like a postcard and every lie inside a room feel even darker by comparison. The Hale family living room glowed with warm lights wrapped around a 12-foot Christmas tree, silver ornaments, red ribbons, little glass angels catching the firelight. Somewhere upstairs, my niece and nephew were laughing over a board game. In the kitchen, cinnamon, ham, roasted potatoes, and hot cider filled the air like nothing ugly could possibly happen under that roof. But I was sitting at the dining table with a stack of legal papers in front of me, and 6 people were staring at me like I was the problem they had finally agreed to solve. My name is Daniel Whitaker, 43 years old, born and raised in Vermont, white, quiet by nature, and stubborn when it matters. I built Whitaker Construction from a 2-bay garage, a used pickup, and winters so cold your fingers ached before sunrise. I knew the weight of lumber, payroll, debt, promises, and family land. What I did not know, not until that night, was how cold a Christmas room could feel when your wife stopped standing beside you and started standing with the people trying to take what your father left behind. Melissa sat across from me in a cream sweater, diamond earrings flashing whenever she turned her head, her face calm in that polished way people use when they have practiced a conversation before you enter it. Her father, Robert Hale, stood near the fireplace with a glass of bourbon in his hand, talking like a retired attorney even though no one had asked him to argue a case. Her mother, Patricia, kept smoothing the napkins as if manners could make an ambush look respectable. Her brother Brandon leaned against the doorway, smiling too much, checking his phone every few minutes, waiting for his payday to arrive in blue ink. Robert tapped the top page with 2 fingers and said it was only a family financial restructuring agreement. Nothing dramatic, nothing hostile, just something responsible adults did when assets became complicated. Patricia sighed and told me not to turn Christmas into a fight. Brandon gave a short laugh and said, "Come on, Dan. It's paperwork, not a firing squad." Melissa did not correct him. She did not reach for my hand. She picked up the pen first, signed her name on the final page, then slid it across the table like a challenge. "There," she said, her voice soft enough for the room and sharp enough for me. I signed it. "Now be a man and do the same." I looked at her signature. Melissa and Whitaker. Clean, confident, careless. The fire popped behind Robert. Ice tapped against the window. The pen sat between us, black and silver, heavier than steel. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone. I only looked at my wife, then at the papers they had forced onto my Christmas dinner table, and said, "That signature just cost you everything." The room did not react all at once. It tightened first. Robert's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Patricia's hands froze over a folded napkin. Brandon's smile held for 1 extra second, then flickered at the edges. Melissa stared at me like I had spoken in a language she did not know, but I knew she understood every word. People do not panic when they hear nonsense. They panic when some quiet part of them recognizes a door closing. Robert cleared his throat and forced a laugh, the kind of laugh men use when they need the room to believe they are still in charge. "Daniel, do not be dramatic," he said. "This document protects everyone." I looked down at the stack of papers. 24 pages, cream-colored legal stock, numbered sections, signature blocks, witness lines, notary language, the kind of document designed to look boring enough to hide intent. I had seen plenty of contracts in my life. Construction teaches you to read the fine print, because one missed clause can turn a good job into 6 months of unpaid invoices and lawyers arguing over commas. This one had teeth. It talked about marital asset consolidation, temporary management authority, emergency restructuring rights, and voluntary acknowledgement of shared interest. Pretty phrases. Soft gloves over sharp hands. Robert had prepared it like a man setting a table before the guest arrives, certain the meal was already his. He had chosen Christmas because guilt makes good rope. He had chosen his own house because home field advantage matters. He had placed Melissa across from me because a husband is supposed to weaken when his wife looks disappointed. And Melissa, my wife of 11 years, had signed first because they thought her signature would pull mine behind it like a sled through snow. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You are embarrassing me." That was when something old inside me went still. Not angry, not wounded. Still, there is a difference. Anger moves too fast. Hurt reaches for explanations. Stillness watches. I picked up the first page and turned it slowly. The paper made a soft scraping sound against the table runner, louder than it should have been in that quiet room. Brandon pushed away from the doorway. This is ridiculous. He is stalling. Patricia whispered Melissa's name as if she could pull the evening back into shape. Robert stepped closer, his shadow falling over the document. You were asked to sign because your wife deserves transparency, he said. After everything she has given this marriage, she should not have to beg for security. I almost smiled at that. Melissa had given speeches about security for months. Security meant my company valuation. Security meant access to business accounts she had never helped build. Security meant the Vermont land her brother had started calling underused acreage after his second failed investment deal. Security meant taking the house my mother still visited every Sunday and turning it into leverage. I set page 1 down and looked at Robert. You brought a notary to Christmas dinner. His jaw tightened. Responsible planning requires witnesses. I turned my eyes to the hallway, where a woman in a gray cardigan stood pretending to study family photos. I had noticed her when we arrived. She had not been introduced as family. She had not touched the food. She had a leather folder under one arm and the careful posture of someone being paid to stay invisible. Of course, I said. Witnesses. Melissa exhaled hard. Daniel, stop making this ugly. I looked back at her, at the woman who used to dance barefoot in our kitchen when the first snow fell, at the woman now measuring my silence like a weakness she could spend. I am not making it ugly, I said. I am just reading what you signed. Her face changed then. Not enough for her family to notice, but enough for me. A small tightening around the mouth. A flash in the eyes. The first crack in the ice. Because deep down, Melissa knew something Robert did not. She knew I had been quiet for 3 weeks. She knew I had stopped asking why she closed her laptop when I entered the room. She knew I had stopped reacting when Brandon mentioned selling land that did not belong to him. She knew silence from me was never empty. It was storage. It was measurement. It was a man counting boards before making the cut. Robert tapped the document again, harder this time. Sign it, Daniel. I picked up the pen. Brandon's shoulders relaxed. Patricia breathed out. Melissa watched my hand like her future was already settling into place. Then I turned the stack to page 7 and laid my finger on the clause they should have read before they tried to corner me under Christmas lights. Page 7 did not look special at first. That was the beauty of it. No bold letters. No red ink. No dramatic title warning anyone to slow down. Just one quiet paragraph buried beneath language about voluntary disclosure and good faith restructuring. I kept my finger on the clause and watched the room lean toward it without moving. Robert frowned, annoyed before he was informed. Brandon squinted like the words might rearrange themselves into something useful. Patricia looked at Melissa, and Melissa looked at me. Her eyes asked the question her pride would not let her mouth ask. What did you do? I read the first sentence out loud, steady and plain. All parties signing this agreement affirm that they have read and understood the full document, that no party is acting under coercion, concealed financial pressure, undisclosed family interest, or third-party influence. Robert's face tightened. Standard language, he said too quickly. Boilerplate. I nodded once. Some of it. Then I read. The next line. Any signature attached to this agreement shall also serve as sworn acknowledgement that the signer has disclosed all personal, familial, and financial motives connected to the transfer, management, or attempted control of Whitaker marital and trust-protected assets. The fire clicked softly behind him. Outside, wind pressed snow against the glass. Inside, the warmth went thin. Brandon stopped looking at his phone. Melissa's hand lowered from the edge of the table to her lap. Robert reached for the document, but I did not slide it to him. Not yet. For the first time that night, the paper belonged to the silence more than to him. That was not in the draft I reviewed, he said. I looked at him. Which draft? His mouth closed. It was a small thing, but small things matter in rooms like that. Men who believe they are careful often forget the oldest rule of paperwork. Every version leaves a footprint. Every attachment has a timestamp. Every email has a shadow. 3 weeks earlier, I had sat alone in my truck outside our house while the dashboard clock glowed 9:42 at night and snow melted on the windshield. Melissa was inside, on the phone with her father, speaking low enough that she thought walls would protect her. But I had not needed to hear every word. I only needed to hear my name, the word pressure, and Robert saying, "Christmas is the right time. He will not make a scene in front of the family." That sentence did something to me. It did not break my heart. It organized it. The next morning, I drove 48 miles to Burlington and sat across from Marcus Reed, the lawyer my father trusted before I was old enough to understand what a trust even was. Marcus had white hair, tired eyes, and the calm patience of a man who had watched greed wear every kind of Sunday suit. I gave him what I had. The emails Melissa forgot to delete from our shared office computer. The texts Brandon sent asking how fast acreage could be liquidated. A calendar invite titled Asset Conversation that included Robert, Melissa, and a private lender from Montpelier. Marcus did not whistle. He did not curse. He only took off his glasses, set them on the desk, and said, "Daniel, they are not asking for security. They are building a door into your life." So we built a lock. Not a trap in the way angry people imagine traps. Nothing illegal. Nothing cruel. Just precision. Marcus requested the latest draft from Robert under the excuse of review. Then he inserted protective language that Robert should have read, language that made every signature a mirror. If they were honest, it protected everyone. If they were hiding motives, it preserved proof. That was the difference between revenge and preparation. Revenge wants noise. Preparation waits for the truth to sign its own name. Back in the Hale dining room, I finally slid page 7 toward Robert. His eyes moved across the clause once, then again, slower. The color left his confidence first. Brandon stepped forward. "What does that mean?" he asked. Nobody answered him. Melissa whispered, "Daniel." My name sounded different in her mouth now. Smaller. Less certain. I looked at her signed name on the final page, then at Robert's witness line beneath it, then at Brandon's initials beside the family interest addendum he had been foolish enough to approve before dinner. "It means," I said, "you all just confirmed exactly what you were trying to hide." Long before Melissa learned the word asset, that land had a name. My father called it Whitaker Ground, 40 acres of pine, rock, frozen creek, and stubborn hill just outside Waterbury, Vermont, where winter arrived early and left late. To someone reading a spreadsheet, it looked like developable acreage with road access and long-term appreciation. To me, it was where my father taught me how to drive an old Chevy with a cracked bench seat and a heater that only worked when it felt generous. It was where my mother planted tomatoes every spring, even though the deer treated the garden like a buffet. It was where my father came home with sawdust on his coat, lifted me onto the porch rail, and told me a man does not own land so he can brag about it. He takes care of it because one day the land may be the only thing that remembers what his family survived. I was 16 when he died from a heart attack in the lumberyard office, right beside a coffee mug, a stack of invoices, and a radio playing the Red Sox game too softly for anyone to enjoy. Grief did not come into our house like thunder. It came like unpaid bills, quiet envelopes, phone calls my mother took in the pantry so I would not hear her voice shake. Men from the bank with clean shoes stepping carefully around our muddy porch. My mother, Eleanor Whitaker, never cried in front of them. She sat at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and listened while they explained interest rates, liens, options, and consequences as if those words were weather and not knives wrapped in polite language. We could have sold then. Plenty of people told her to. 40 acres near ski country was not nothing, even back then. But she looked at me after they left and said, "Your father held this line. Now we hold it." So we did. I worked after school, weekends, summers, holidays, any day with enough daylight to swing a hammer or stack lumber. At 19, I bought my first used truck, a blue Ford with 211,000 miles on it, and a passenger door that only opened from the outside. At 22, I rented a 2-bay garage and painted Whitaker Construction on a plywood sign because a real sign cost money I did not have. My first jobs were decks, sheds, roof patches, driveway forms, basement repairs, anything that let me pay one bill before the next one arrived. I learned that concrete does not care if you are tired. Payroll does not care if your back hurts. Clients do not care that you buried your father too young. The world asks for proof every morning. And for years, my proof was showing up before sunrise with frost on my windshield and coffee burning my tongue. That was why I protected the company the way I did. Not because I was greedy. Because every truck, every tool, every contract, every acre had a story under it. My mother later placed the land into an irrevocable family trust on Marcus Reed's advice, not to hide anything from a future wife, but to make sure panic, grief, or someone else's appetite could never force a Whitaker to sign away what generations had carried. When I married Melissa, I told her that. I walked her across the backfield in October, leaves bright as fire under our boots, and explained the trust, the old sawmill foundation, the creek line, the house my father never finished renovating. She held my arm and said it was beautiful. Back then, I believed she meant the land. Years later, I understood she meant the value. That is the thing about certain kinds of hunger. It does not announce itself at dinner. It waits until the numbers get large enough to change the way someone says your name. Back in Robert Hale's dining room, with page 7 sitting between us and Christmas lights glowing on the windows, I could almost smell that old garage again. Oil, pine dust, cold iron, and the life I had built one hard morning at a time. Robert saw paperwork. Brandon saw cash. Patricia saw status. Melissa saw leverage. But I saw my mother at a kitchen table, refusing to sell while the whole world told her to be practical. I saw my father's hands on the steering wheel of that old Chevy. I saw every winter I had worked through to keep the Whitaker name attached to something solid. So when Melissa whispered my name like I had betrayed her by protecting myself, I did not look away. I had spent my whole life learning how to hold a line. That night, under her parents' roof, I finally let them see where the line was. Melissa did not become someone else overnight. That would have been easier to understand. A clean break gives a man something to point at. A date, a sentence, a moment when the road turns. But greed rarely walks through the front door wearing its own name. It arrives dressed as concern. It asks innocent questions over coffee. It says, I am just trying to understand our future. For the first few years of our marriage, Melissa loved the quiet life more than I expected. She liked the white farmhouse outside Waterbury, the long gravel driveway, the way snow softened the roofline in January. She liked Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, maple syrup in glass bottles, apples by the pound, and the smell of cedar smoke from the neighbor's stove. She used to sit on the porch in one of my old flannel shirts, holding a mug with both hands, telling me she had never felt so safe. I believed her. Because I wanted to. Maybe because she was beautiful. Maybe because she made the old house feel less haunted by everything I had lost. Maybe because a man who spends his life building things sometimes forgets people can renovate themselves into strangers. The first change came after Whitaker Construction landed the school expansion contract in Burlington. It was the biggest job we had ever won, 3 buildings, a new gym, a library wing, and enough work to keep 37 employees steady through winter. I came home proud, exhausted, covered in dust, expecting her to be happy. She was. At first. She hugged me, poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider because I had an early concrete pour the next morning, and told me she was proud. Then she asked, so what does this make the company worth now? I laughed because I thought it was curiosity. A wife asking about a husband's business is not a crime. But questions have temperatures, and hers felt different. Warmer than casual. Sharper than interest. After that, the questions multiplied. How much equipment did we own outright? Were the trucks leased or titled? How much liability insurance did we carry? Who controlled the operating account if something happened to me? I answered most of it because marriage is supposed to be trust, and I had not yet learned that trust without boundaries can become an open gate. Then Brandon started visiting more. He had always been the kind of man who wore confidence like a rented suit. Good smile, bad timing, big ideas, no patience for work that left dirt under his nails. He talked about flipping properties near ski towns, short-term rentals, private investors, quick liquidity. He called the Vermont land sleeping money. The first time he said it, I corrected him. It is family land. He lifted both hands and smiled. Same thing, Dan. Family should benefit from it. Melissa said nothing, and that silence stayed with me longer than his words. Patricia began sending Melissa articles about wealth management. Robert invited us to dinner and asked whether I had considered consolidating assets for marital clarity. Each conversation sounded reasonable if you ignored the pattern. That is how pressure works. One snowflake is nothing. Enough of them can close a road. By fall, Melissa had stopped talking about safety and started talking about what she deserved. She said she had stood by me through long hours, missed dinners, emergency calls, and job site stress. She said she had sacrificed too. Some of that was true. Marriage does cost both people something. But the truth became a tool in her hands. She used it to pry at doors that had never been locked against her until she tried to remove the hinges. One night in November, I found her at the kitchen island with a yellow legal pad, writing numbers beside words like trucks, land, trust, insurance, equity. She covered it too quickly. I pretended not to see. That was the moment my heart stopped arguing with my eyes. Love kept wanting an explanation. Evidence kept setting one on the table. Back in her parents' dining room on Christmas Eve, all those little moments stood around us like ghosts. The questions, the dinners, the articles, Brandon's smile, Robert's legal language, Melissa's careful disappointment. None of it had been random. They had been measuring me for months, looking for the soft place where loyalty could be mistaken for weakness. Melissa looked down at page 7, then back at me, and for the first time that night, she did not look angry. She looked exposed. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered every time she had called my father's land wasted. Every time she had let her brother count my company like it was already carved. Every time she had allowed her family to speak over me in my own marriage. The pen was still in my hand, but I did not need to sign anything. Not anymore. The most important signature at that table already belonged to her. Marcus Reed called it a lock, not a trap, and that mattered to me. Traps are built by people who want someone to fall. Locks are built by people who have already seen someone reaching for the door. 3 weeks before Christmas, I sat in Marcus's office in Burlington with a paper cup of coffee going cold between my hands while sleet ticked against the window. His office had not changed much since my mother first took me there after my father died. Same dark shelves, same framed diplomas, same brass lamp, throwing a circle of yellow light over whatever truth had been placed on his desk. I laid out everything I had found, one piece at a time, because men like Marcus do not need drama. They need sequence. The emails from Melissa to Robert. The text from Brandon asking whether trust land could be converted into family liquidity. The screenshot of a calendar invite marked private. The photo of the yellow legal pad Melissa had covered with her sleeve. Marcus read in silence, his glasses low on his nose. The room so quiet I could hear the old radiator clicking like a metronome. When he finished, he folded his hands and said, "They are going to try to make consent look clean." I asked him what that meant, although some part of me already knew. He said they would not drag me into a fight. They would place me in a room full of family, use guilt as pressure, call it responsibility, and make any refusal look selfish. If I signed, they would argue I had agreed voluntarily. If I refused, they would paint me as secretive, controlling, and financially abusive. It was neat. That was what made it dangerous. Ugly plans usually announce themselves. Polished ones wear a tie and say they are here to help. Marcus asked if I wanted to file first, confront Melissa, freeze communications, bring everything into the open before Christmas. I looked at the sleet sliding down the glass and thought about my mother's kitchen table, my father's land, every employee whose paycheck depended on the company staying steady. Then I thought about Melissa sitting across from me at dinner, smiling like nothing was wrong while her family sharpened paperwork behind my back. "No," I said. "I want them to show what they are doing." Marcus studied me for a long moment. "Then we do this clean." Clean meant lawful. Clean meant documented. Clean meant no shouting, no threats, no secret games that would poison the evidence. Marcus requested Robert's draft under the ordinary language of legal review, professional courtesy from one old attorney to another. Robert sent it because arrogance loves paperwork almost as much as greed does. He believed the battlefield was already mapped. He believed I was just the man standing in the way of a signature. Marcus found the weak places fast. The draft tried to create temporary management authority over assets Melissa could later claim were marital in practice. It blurred language around the company, the farmhouse, and future proceeds connected to land development. It did not directly steal anything. Smart documents rarely do. They open a side door, then call it a hallway. Marcus added language that turned the door into a mirror. Full disclosure. No coercion. No undisclosed family benefit. No third-party financial interest. All signers affirming under penalty of perjury that they had read, understood, and disclosed their motives. If Robert read it carefully, he would stop. If Melissa read it honestly, she would ask questions. If Brandon had any sense, he would step away from the table. But people rushing toward money do not read mirrors. They only look for reflections of what they already want. By the time Christmas Eve came, every piece was in place. Marcus had copies of the drafts, email headers, document histories, and notarized trust records proving the land had never been available for marital transfer. He also reminded me that the Hale house had security cameras in the living room and dining room, because Robert loved protecting his valuables. That detail stayed with me all night as I sat under the glow of their Christmas tree, listening to them insist the document was harmless. They thought they were creating witnesses against me. They were creating witnesses against themselves. So when Melissa signed first, when Robert stood close enough to make pressure look like guidance, when Brandon smirked beside the doorway with his own initials already buried in the addendum, I did not stop them. I let the ink dry. I let the room record itself. I let every careful sentence they had ignored become a quiet door closing behind them. Then I placed my finger on page 7 and watched their plan begin to read back to them in their own handwriting. The mistake they made was believing page 7 only mattered if I signed. That was what Robert kept circling back to, as if repetition could repair what carelessness had broken. "This is incomplete without your signature," he said, his voice lower now, the bourbon forgotten on the mantel. "Until you sign, nothing is executed." I nodded because, technically, he was right about one part and dangerously wrong about the rest. The agreement would not transfer control without me. It would not move company authority, touch the trust, or give Melissa the leverage they wanted. But their signatures did something else. They created admissions. They marked intent. They attached names to motives they had spent months pretending did not exist. A contract can fail and still leave fingerprints. That is what Robert should have remembered before he turned Christmas dinner into a conference room. I kept my hand flat on page 7 and said, "You are right. It does not move my assets. It documents your attempt." Brandon laughed once, too loud and too short. "Attempt? Come on. That is insane." He looked at Melissa, waiting for her to laugh with him, but she did not. Her eyes had dropped to the addendum near the back, the one Marcus had insisted we leave plain enough for a careless man to initial and clear enough for a judge to understand. Family financial interest disclosure. Brandon's initials sat beside a line stating that no signer, witness, or related party expected direct or indirect financial benefit from the proposed restructuring. He had initialed it before dessert, probably while joking about football, because Robert had told him where to mark and Brandon had never respected anything he did not have to earn. "Read your line," I said. He did not move, so I read it for him. "The undersigned affirms there is no pending debt, investment pressure, private lending obligation, or personal financial need influencing this agreement." Patricia whispered, "Brandon?" That one word carried years of denial. Brandon's jaw flexed. "It is standard wording." I looked at him. "You owe a private lender in Montpelier $186,000, due January 15th. The whole room changed shape. Not loudly. Worse. Quietly. Patricia stepped back from the table as if the floor had shifted under her. Robert's eyes snapped to his son, not with surprise exactly, but with the anger of a man whose hidden card had been shown too early. Melissa closed her eyes for half a second. There it was. The truth passing between them without needing speech. She had known. Maybe not every number, maybe not every deadline, but enough. Enough to let her brother call my land sleeping money. Enough to let her father build a document around urgency and call it security. Enough to sign her name before mine and pretend it was love asking for trust. I turned to the notary in the hallway. She looked pale, clutching her folder. "Ma'am," I said gently, "you may want to make a note that I have not signed and that I am objecting to the circumstances of this meeting." Robert snapped. "She is here at my request." "I know," I said. "That is why her notes matter." The notary looked at Robert, then at the papers, then back at me. She did not say much. Professionals in uncomfortable rooms learn the value of few words. But she opened her folder and wrote something down. That small scratch of pen on paper sounded louder than Brandon's laugh had. Melissa finally spoke. "Daniel, this has gotten out of hand." I almost wish she had chosen better words. Out of hand sounded like a spilled drink, not a plan collapsing under its own signatures. I looked at her wedding ring, bright under the chandelier, then at the name she had written so confidently. "No," I said. "It is finally in hand." Robert took one step toward the table, trying to recover the posture of authority. "You cannot use a holiday misunderstanding to accuse this family of anything." I slid the addendum forward beside page 7. This family used a holiday to create the misunderstanding. His face hardened, but his eyes kept returning to the document. The page had become the only honest person in the room. It did not care who was embarrassed. It did not care who hosted dinner. It simply held what they had signed. Melissa reached for the papers, then stopped herself, maybe remembering the cameras in the corners, the notary in the hall, the fact that paper trails do not disappear just because panic wants them to. For 11 years, I had thought the worst thing a wife could do was stop loving you. I was wrong. The worst thing is when she still knows exactly where you are vulnerable and hands that map to people who call you family. I stood, left the pen untouched, and buttoned my coat slowly. No shouting. No slam chair. No performance. Just movement. Snow waited beyond the front door, clean and cold. Behind me, Melissa said my name again, but this time it had no command in it. Only fear. I turned back once and looked at the table, at the signatures, at the Christmas lights shining on the polished wood. Keep your copy, I said. You are going to need it. The first hearing took place 17 days after Christmas, in a county courthouse where the floors smelled faintly of old wax and wet boots. January had turned Vermont hard and gray, the kind of cold that makes every breath feel counted. I arrived early with Marcus Reed beside me, carrying one slim folder and the calm expression of a man who had never needed a loud voice to win a serious room. Melissa arrived 10 minutes later with Robert, Brandon, Patricia, and an attorney from Burlington who looked expensive enough to make bad facts feel temporarily dressed up. She wore a navy coat, pearl earrings, and the same controlled face she had worn at her parents' table. But control is different in daylight. Under Christmas lights, confidence can look warm. Under courthouse fluorescence, it can look thin. Her petition said she wanted temporary control of marital assets, emergency access to company records, a freeze on trust-related transactions, and exclusive occupancy of the farmhouse until the divorce was resolved. Reading those words in Marcus's office had felt like watching someone try to move into my life by court order. She claimed I had become secretive. She claimed I had hidden financial information. She claimed the Christmas meeting had been a reasonable attempt to create transparency, and that I had twisted it into an excuse to intimidate her family. That last line almost made Marcus smile. Not happy, just patient. In the courtroom, Melissa sat straight, hands folded, eyes forward. Brandon avoided looking at me. Robert whispered too. Their lawyer, confident again now that the room had rules he recognized. But rules were exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. When the judge entered, everyone stood, and the sound of chairs moving across the floor felt like the last normal sound before weather changes. The arguments began politely. Melissa's lawyer painted her as a wife seeking security after years of being excluded from complicated finances. He described Whitaker Construction as a marital enterprise built during the marriage, the farmhouse as a shared home, and the Christmas document as evidence that both parties had attempted to resolve matters privately. He said I had walked out rather than cooperate. He said Melissa had signed in good faith. I listened without moving. There are moments when defending yourself too early only helps the lie stretch its legs. Marcus waited until every polished sentence had settled, then stood with page 7 in his hand. He did not wave it. He did not dramatize it. He simply asked permission to submit the signed agreement, the full draft history, the email chain, the family interest addendum, the notary's notes, and the trust documents proving the land had been protected since before the marriage. The judge adjusted her glasses. Melissa looked at Robert. Robert looked at the table. That was the first quiet fracture. Marcus walked the court through the timeline. Robert's original draft. Marcus's reviewed version. The protective clause. The emails discussing pressure. Brandon's debt deadline. Melissa's message asking whether signing under family pressure could later be framed as consent. Each exhibit landed softly, but together they sounded like doors locking one after another. Then came the video. Not the whole evening. Just the dining room camera from Robert's own security system, obtained after Marcus subpoenaed the footage Robert had insisted would prove I was hostile. The screen showed the tree glowing behind us, the papers on the table, Melissa signing first, Robert standing over me, Patricia urging me not to ruin Christmas, Brandon saying it was just paperwork. Then my voice, calm as cold water, asking about the notary. The judge watched without expression. Melissa's shoulders sank by a fraction. Robert's lawyer stopped taking notes. When the clip ended, the room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus said, "Your Honor, my client did not conceal assets. He refused to surrender protected property under coordinated family pressure. The only party who signed that night was Mrs. Whitaker, and her signature affirmed disclosures that the record now shows were false or incomplete." Melissa's attorney objected, but weak facts make weak objections. The judge asked 3 questions. First, whether the land trust predated the marriage. It did. Second, whether Brandon's financial interest had been disclosed before the signing. It had not. Third, whether Melissa had read page 7 before signing. Her attorney hesitated. Melissa finally answered for herself, voice low. "I trusted my father." The sentence sat there, small and ruined. The judge denied emergency access, denied the freeze on trust assets, denied exclusive occupancy, and ordered both parties to preserve records for further review. She did not call Melissa a liar. Courts rarely give you that kind of theater. She did something colder. She treated the truth as documented fact. As we left, Brandon stayed seated, pale and silent. Patricia wiped her eyes. Robert stared at Marcus like a man realizing the law had not betrayed him. His arrogance had. Melissa caught up with me near the courthouse steps, snow drifting between us in thin, dry flakes. "Daniel," she said, "I did not think it would go this far." I looked at the woman I had loved, standing in the cold with her breath shaking in front of her, and I felt the strange mercy of finally seeing clearly. "That is the problem, Melissa," I said. "You thought about what you could get, not how far you were willing to go." The farmhouse was quiet when I got back from the courthouse, the kind of quiet that does not ask anything from you. Snow covered the roof in a clean white sheet. The gravel driveway had hardened under a crust of ice. The old porch light glowed amber against the afternoon gray, and for a moment I sat in the truck with both hands on the steering wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Winning does not feel the way people think it does. There was no music, no rush of triumph, no sudden repair of what Melissa and her family had cracked open. There was only breath, cold glass, and the strange emptiness that comes after a man spends months holding himself together and finally gets permission to set the weight down. I walked inside, hung my coat by the door, and stood in the entryway where Melissa used to leave her boots sideways no matter how many times I straightened them. The house still held pieces of her in small, ordinary places. A scarf on the hook near the stairs. A white coffee mug in the cabinet with a lipstick mark faint enough to look like a memory. A Christmas wreath still hanging over the fireplace, dry now, the ribbon curled at the edges. I took it down carefully, not because I hated it, because some things are only beautiful in their season, and when the season is over, keeping them up starts to feel like lying. Over the next few weeks, the legal process kept moving in the same quiet direction. Melissa's emergency motion stayed denied. The trust remained untouched. Whitaker Construction stayed under my control. The farmhouse was confirmed as protected property tied to the trust structure my mother had set in place years before Melissa ever walked across that backfield. Brandon's lender problem became his own, as it should have been from the beginning. Robert stepped back from advising Melissa after Marcus filed a formal notice about potential conflicts and misrepresentations. Patricia sent one message through Melissa asking if we could all sit down and be civil. I did not answer. Some tables have already told you everything you need to know. Melissa tried calling me 3 times the week after the hearing. I let all 3 go to voicemail. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. There is a difference between forgiveness and reopening the door for the same cold air. On the 4th day, she left a message. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. She said she had been scared. She said her father had pushed too hard. She said Brandon's debt made everyone desperate. She said she never meant to take everything. I listened once, standing in the mudroom with work boots in my hand, and felt the old part of me reach for excuses on her behalf. That part knew her laugh from better years. That part remembered October leaves, porch coffee, the way she used to touch my sleeve when she wanted my attention. But another part of me, older now, steadier, remembered her signing first. Remembered her watching her family corner me and calling it responsibility. Remembered the way she looked embarrassed before she looked sorry. I deleted the message without anger. That surprised me more than anything. Anger had carried me through the first miles, but peace was what finally got me home. By February, the divorce had become paperwork instead of weather. The attorneys spoke more than we did. Numbers were reviewed. Boundaries were drawn. The company kept building. My crews poured foundations when the thaw came early. We finished a municipal garage outside Montpelier and broke ground on a library renovation in Burlington. Every Friday, payroll cleared. Every Sunday, my mother came over after church, made coffee too strong, and pretended not to inspect whether I was eating enough. One afternoon, she found me in the barn sorting old tools that had belonged to my father. She picked up his tape measure, turned it over in her palm, and said, "He would be proud that you did not let bitterness make your decisions." I did not answer right away because some sentences land deeper than expected. I had thought I was protecting land, a company, a house, a name. Maybe I was. But I was also protecting the kind of man my father had tried to raise, the kind who could stand his ground without becoming cruel, who could let the truth do the heavy lifting, who could lose a wife and still not lose himself. Spring came slowly that year. Snow retreated from the stone walls. The creek behind the field started talking again under the ice. One evening, I stood on the porch as the sun dropped behind the pines, turning the sky the color of warm copper. The house felt different, not empty anymore, just honest. Melissa had thought one signature would open my life for her family to divide. Instead, it closed the door on the version of me that still believed love could survive without loyalty. I kept the land. I kept the company. I kept my name. And in the end, that was enough.